Hey everyone, welcome to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. I'm Melissa Albers.
And I'm JJ Parker. This podcast is for seekers, seekers of happiness and joy, seekers of a centered approach to success in life, seekers of their true, authentic selves.
Get ready for some real talk on everything from anxiety, emotions, and habits to love, compassion, and forgiveness. We know you'll be challenged and enlightened by this conversation. We're so glad you're here. Let's dive in.
Melissa, you and I joke about work amnesia.
All the time.
Right? This idea that we forget things that we did at work.
Yep.
I had the craziest amount of work amnesia this week.
You did? That's saying something because we almost always have crazy amounts. So this ought to be good.
Well, a lot of times we will have like little bits of work amnesia, I say. But okay, let me tell you what I forgot.
Yeah.
And you'll understand the impact. And then I want to talk to you about like what happened and why this happened.
Oh, got it.
So I think it'll be interesting. Okay. So for one of our businesses, we have been really working on retention and recruiting, right? Recruiting more people. Then the hire environment's really difficult.
Yes.
Lately.
Right.
And from a business perspective, right? Like I'm like the single owner. There's no other shareholders, right? Mm-hmm. What the leadership team and I started talking about was, is that business at a point where a stock option program would make sense for the employees for retention and recruitment, right?
Yep.
Kind of all share in the upside. Like, obviously like I want to do that for everybody.
Yeah.
As the company grows, right? So we're thinking about a stock option program. And I was like, okay, like my task from that meeting was to go investigate what that looks like.
Okay.
So our lawyer, his name's Harold.
Harold, yes.
I was like, okay, I gotta get a meeting with Harold. So for some reason, I was like, okay, did I ever talk to Harold about this? I wonder if I ever talked to Harold about a stock option program. Harold's been our lawyer for like 10 years. Like I probably at some point did. So I typed into my email, Harold stock option, and hit return. And it came back with the search results. And there sitting in my email was a stock option program that he had already completely drafted.
As per your request.
As per my request. And that I had actually already signed and ratified into the company corporate documents.
Get out.
Yeah.
You forgot the signature part.
Yeah. Right. This is not a minor thing. This is like, this is me like peeling off a huge percentage of the company and not owning it anymore.
Oh my gosh, JJ. When was it?
2017. So that was a little, that was a little disturbing.
Right.
Like how could I have forgotten that I did that, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't like that I forgot that. It really kind of irks me. Like I don't like when I lose my pencil. Like I've had this one pencil for like a decade.
I know you have.
Like I just don't like losing little
He's
things.
Holding, by the way, I should just describe it. It's a mechanical pencil. It's a little more small around the barrel than most, and it's got silver on either end, and he really likes that pencil.
And so I don't like losing little things or forgetting about little things. I really don't like forgetting about really big things.
Yeah. I don't know.
So
Go ahead.
I got thinking about that specifically, like 2017.
Yeah.
And I was like, what was going on in my life in 2017 that I would have kind of like forgot that I did this?
Oh. And?
Well, so a year prior.
Am I in trouble?
Yeah, totally. Well, a year prior, I had bought out my business partner. That
Yeah.
was an super
Yes,
emotional
that was.
thing.
It was.
Then right before this agreement, you and I shut down Choreology.
Oh.
We had,
Oh.
then I had hired one of the key employees from Choreology over to this other business. I had a huge staff kerfuffle.
Yeah.
Like rearranged a whole bunch of people on the bus.
Yeah. Yeah. It was such a
I think it was
tumultuous
just a
time.
really emotional time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And that might be why I just simply forgot that I had done this.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if this podcast is the time to ask these kinds of
Let's
really
go.
deep emotional questions.
I think it is.
So, you know, both of us have work amnesia. And what we mean when we say work amnesia is we can both put our heads down and just produce stuff. Go, 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 go.
Mhm.
Like, and produce way more than the average person would naturally consider as normal. And we are both a bit, well, I don't want to say perfectionist because you're going to say, no, we're not, but we sort of are. Like, the quality of our work is important to us. Let's say it that way instead of perfectionism. And I am wondering right now if we have used that go mode to hide or avoid some really strong things that are happening in our lives that are difficult.
Uh-huh.
Is that what you were kind of getting at? Is that why you were thinking that would be a good thing to talk about today?
Yeah. It really got me thinking about it really got me thinking about the idea like using work. I mean, certainly maybe like using work as an avoidance technique.
Yeah.
Or even the idea like when you're in a high emotion state, you act like it really does like affect your memory and what you can actually recall. So the idea that like can you even kind of like trust your memory very well when you're in these emotional states? Right? That's probably like the deeper thing I was thinking about. Like when I'm really emotional, when I'm not like my centered self, when I'm not my authentic self, when I'm really out there, you know, on the edge, like I'm doing things, right? Hopefully those are the right things. I certainly probably think they are at the time.
Yeah.
But then the idea that like my recollection of what happened during those times is frankly not very good.
That's super interesting.
To the point where I forgot like a really major thing that happened in the business.
Yeah.
Melissa and I are huge self-awareness nerds. We've been working on this stuff for a really long time, and we love talking about it and sharing it with all of you. We've actually brought all of the stuff we've made into an online course, and we think it's really great. The course starts by learning about yourself and how your mind-body connection works. It dives into your thoughts and feelings, and then helps you learn how to become your true, authentic self. Start your journey today. Head to theselfawarenessjourney.com to learn more and sign up.
Well, I think, you know, maybe you're being a little hard on yourself. I mean, yes, you don't remember that document, but I actually remember when you were doing that, and I remember that it was really important to you. It's always been important to you, that philosophy of sharing the wealth, sharing everything. That's just who you are. So I don't know whether I would beat myself up so strongly that you don't remember actually signing the document, because you've talked about doing this many, many times. This isn't a new thing. I mean, here it's coming up again. I'm trying to give you a little grace here so you're not so.
I feel more like I have like Alzheimer's. I like keep on doing the same thing over and over thinking it's new.
No, but I think, you know what though, there's something really interesting in here about when we kick up the activity, when we kick up the go mode in an effort to avoid or waylay other stronger, deeper feelings or senses
Mhm.
that we have. That's a very interesting thing to think about. You know?
Yeah. Sorry, I was just pausing. Like this is a little bit like this is an interesting podcast, Melissa, because like here, this is a thing that I was like really kind of struggling with all week.
Yeah.
And we talk about personal things. Obviously, we use ourselves as examples all the time.
Yeah, we do.
On this.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say like a lot of the stories that I'll talk about do have a bit of like comic irony to them, or like
welcome to
whatever.
life.
But like this one to me is like really hard because it is bringing me back to a time in my life, which was probably the hardest time in my life, frankly. I mean, getting a divorce from my business partner was really hard, and it's just it brings me back to all of that emotion.
Yeah.
So
I get that. Well, and first of all, I really appreciate your vulnerability in this conversation, because we know that this isn't easy stuff. This is really, really hard stuff to talk about. And the other thing, I think that there's a certain level of honesty that you're looking at it with. Except I would also add, that was a few years back, and you are not the same person that you are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think much of the reason you are who you are now is because of that. Right? And I think sometimes when things have a lot of energy for us, especially if it's negative energy or painful, it is way easier to just stuff it out somewhere, stuff it under the bed, put it somewhere else. I have a girlfriend who says when she gets emotionally overwhelmed about a situation, she literally pictures putting it in a shoebox, wrapping a bunch of rope around the shoebox, and she pictures putting it up on the highest shelf of her closet. If that's not the perfect visual for how we try to pack things away,
right?
And I think that I think we all try to pack things away with different techniques. And I think both you and I have, what we've used to pack things away is go mode.
Mm-hmm.
And go so hard and so long and create so much. I mean, it's like prolific creation, that it gives us a false sense that we have processed through, and we don't have any of that residual.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. This is just the worst. Okay. Now I remember. Like I couldn't remember until just now.
Oh.
Now I remember what happened right after that agreement that I forgot about.
Yeah. What?
Is I busted the company apart.
Oh.
I busted it into two business units.
Yes.
Remember, I busted it into two separate businesses.
Yep. Yes.
That's the go mode thing that I did.
Yeah.
Because that took a tremendous amount of effort.
Yes. It
like
did.
a tremendous amount of management,
right?
Change management, detail.
Yeah.
That's the thing I went and dove into. And that's why I forgot this agreement.
Yeah.
Because I did it, and then I jumped into that huge project.
And it's so funny is that this agreement right now is enormously important and impactful. And back then, think about it like this. Back then, that agreement is still very important, but it paled in comparison to the work that you were doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. That's super interesting. Isn't it funny how even just talking in this conversation, like it's helping me get through and process this whole situation.
Well, I think too, as we always talk about how to process our feelings, because we're always working on this with the self-awareness journey, it's like, we always say the traditional model of therapy is where you go back to a situation over and over and over again, and you just recreate the energy of that situation until you find some way of trying to, dissipate the angst around it, or dissipate the heat around it, or whatever it is. But, both of us don't really we don't subscribe fully to that notion. Most of what we talk about is, how are you feeling right now? What's the easiest way for you to move through that and to just go forward in your authenticity, right? So there's an immediacy about that and a real time about that. And that does not lend itself to processing painful things from our past as easily unless we're really being aware about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a slippery slope that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if the intention is pure, like we have work amnesia and we're making jokes about it and stuff like that. But this particular instance was something that was extremely hard and painful. And so what you did is you survived and you created more, created differently. And that's the really important part, to also balance some of this other stuff out with.
And maybe that now you're kind of like unfolding things like that. It could be that when we talk about work amnesia, in sort of our cheeky way, it is about more being like hyper focused and sort of forgetting what we're doing when we're in that hyper focused mode. Right. I think maybe what I went through in 2017 was much more like a traumatic event. Yes. That I was like, that was altering my memory. Oh my gosh. Which is like a step above just our cheeky work amnesia thing that we talk about.
Right. Well, not too far back, we just released a pod on PTSD, and it's not too far away from that, actually. You know, our body, our emotional body or mental body suffers some sort of trauma, and we seem to use the word trauma for things that are Hollywood style. But trauma in an emotional sense can be something very like what you've just described. When we closed Coreology down, even though we did it beautifully, it was so traumatic. Yeah. It was so traumatic, and both of us were wounded. There was a lot of that we were really wounded. So the fact that you were having that experience plus still all of the uncoupling. And I would say too, remember when you were splitting your business into two, you had a fair number of naysayers that didn't think that was the best thing for you to do.
Yeah, and some of them had, and some really long-term employees had to get off the bus. Yeah. Which was hard.
Yep. Yeah. So there was a whole bunch of stuff that went along in that. And that was a really, really major time. I mean, it would, if you want to use the word emotional crisis, that's probably where you would want to use that phrase. Not to be overly dramatic.
I was going to say, this is getting way more dramatic than I intended. I just wanted to talk about how I forgot about one little thing.
One little thing. One little thing. So what's the takeaway from this?
Well, at first, it's like, I like how you phrased like trauma. Yeah. Like, there's this, like you said, Hollywood version of trauma. Yeah. But everyone has their own trauma, like their own definition of it and their own level of it. And it should be like traumatic events. Yes. You know, for one person will look very different to the next. Oh my gosh. Yes. So just this idea that there's no like, you know, you don't have to have like had someone, you know, like, pass away, you know, like like
there doesn't have to be
or
a
cancer
huge event.
Or some huge event doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, all sorts of other things could be trauma. Yes. Yeah. Just even if they're not just like the big couple of things people think about.
You know, it's interesting too, like just using this word, and in my coaching experience, I've seen so many people that will have some sort of something that happened or a relationship that they've experienced that wasn't terribly dysfunctional. It wasn't anything wouldn't be what most people have experienced in their lives, yet the experience to that person was traumatic. It could be, I have one client that was the youngest of 3 children and constantly felt they were the ones who were left holding the bag. They were the ones who were supposed to smooth everything over. And while that might be like, well, yeah, that's, you know, bummer for you. That's where you were in the birth order. I mean, we have all sorts of ways of justifying people's trauma, but how it manifests with this person is that every relationship they enter into as a new leader, there is this real deep concern and worry that they're not going to catch the bag every time and that they're going to be looked at as a bad leader. And it really is deeply seated into that. And that is simply because of a trauma that was experienced to this person, and it was traumatic to them. And it was replicated multiple times, just these little proofs, like this is what's expected. And that proof happened over and over again and became very traumatic. So it is really interesting when you think about what people have in their own systems and what are those things, how are they informing us all the time in our heart and soul as we're trying to go about our business. What do we hold as important today based on some kind of trauma that we've had in ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just making sure we give people grace around those periods of their life, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, for me, it's like, I probably don't even remember how I was acting in 2017 very clearly, or my view of it.
Yeah.
Certainly, I probably have a little bit of delusion around how I thought I was acting and how I was really acting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so just understanding as people are going through these different moments in their life that are traumatic for them, that we should make sure we're giving them grace.
Yeah. And
both like in the moment and well after.
I think that we can extend that suggestion to offering grace to all people. You always hear about this, like, be compassionate, have empathy for others. But this is kind of why this exact idea here that we're talking about is the trauma that people experience, how it manifests, what they forget, what they don't forget, how they cover it, what they do to make themselves feel better. These are all human practices that we all do our own thing all the time, but we really don't know what's happening to the person right next to us. Yeah. We just don't know. We can't know all of the experiences that they've had. I had a guy I was coaching this one time. He was a pretty tough guy. He was very, very introverted, and he had a lot of he's just a little tough to deal with for people. He had a lot of edges, I'll just say that. And I had breakfast with him one time, and my effort for that breakfast was to give him feedback. I had it sort of ready to go, like, okay, I got to help this guy get into a better place with his people. And he came to that meeting and told me that when he was young, his brother was killed, his oldest brother that he was best friends with. And the minute I heard that, it stopped me in my tracks, and I realized there's so much about him I have no idea. And even though it's manifesting in a certain way right now, repetitively, he needs to be treated with love. He needs to be treated with, he's fragile. He's fragile. We're all fragile, and it's just how good we are at covering it.
Yeah. And so that, I think that's really interesting. Like, here you had a perception of a guy that's rough around the edges and a little tough.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in reality,
yeah,
was much more fragile than the exterior view.
Yeah. And I had a buddy who used to say, even big monkeys fall out of trees. And I loved that because I think we all think like, oh, this person has this title or this person has this status. Yeah. So they must be bulletproof, Yeah.
And
no, they fall out of trees just like all the other ones, just like all the rest of us.
So let me ask you, for the next time I get in a really high emotional state.
Yep.
Hopefully I don't. We'll
Hopefully I don't. You will. We will. We all do.
So as far as self-awareness goes, right? Like, I think back now as I'm reflecting on that particular time, I'm like, well, what could I have been doing? Or like, I like to stay more centered during that period of time, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I had a lot of going on. There was a lot of change. There's a lot of motion.
Yeah.
And we weren't really talking a lot about self-awareness, especially like
not to this level
now.
Right.
Not
even
back
remotely.
then. So I didn't have those tools,
exactly.
Right? But where we're at now, as I'm developing those tools to like help keep myself more centered, more consistently, just trying to think, like, what can I do to like notice that I'm getting into this state?
Yeah.
Other than you just calling me out on it.
I don't do that. Okay, fine. I do that. No, you know what I think it is? And I talk to people in coaching all day about this, and it is the gap. I call it the gap because we know inside when we don't feel good, and we all have tremendous skills at avoiding that, hiding it, pushing it away. We all have tremendous skills because we think that will help us. It's like, oh, no. Let's just avoid these really hard feelings because they'll just eventually go away. And they don't. We know that now. We know that. So I think really the first thing is that we give ourselves grace. We know we have the mechanisms inside of us that tell us how we're starting to feel and get off centered. We know that. Then there's a period of time that we either don't know what it's about, don't know why, don't know what to do or whatever, or we want to avoid it. And I call that the gap before we reach a point that we just can't not deal with it. We just hit a wall where it's like, I have to deal with this. And I think our goal here is to shorten that gap, to make that gap more narrow. It's like from the time we recognize that we've been triggered, because that's what it is. It's a trigger. How quickly are we able to have enough self-confidence and trust ourselves to close that gap faster? And that is where we become that centered space again. It's like, you know what? I am sideways. So the other night I was laying in bed right before I went to sleep, and I had a conversation with one of my kids that left me feeling a little unsettled. And then I had gotten real busy in the rest of the day and didn't really think about it. And I crawled in bed to go to bed, and the light was off, and I just had this weird little niggling inside. I just kept thinking like, I just didn't feel quite settled. And I asked myself, what is this? What is this feeling? What is this about? And I just traced it back. And then I recalled what it was. And it was this unsettled conversation. And right there is the point where we would pivot. Now, am I going to create a gap right there and justify it and get mad or have emotion or put a bunch of unrealistic expectations on my kid? Like, or can I just say, oh, I'm feeling unsettled about that. And I know my children are so gifted and resourced to figure out whatever they need to figure out. And so I was able to close that gap sooner. Now that's just a little small example, but I think that's how we do it. We just say, oh, okay, hang on a minute. What is this feeling? And trace it back until we get to the actual root.
Yeah.
And it sounds complicated, but it really isn't. It's like something doesn't feel good inside. We've talked about triggers. The body tells us when we're not feeling good. The body tells us we've been triggered, and we can start identifying what the trigger is based on where it feels.
Yep. Something we can practice every day. Even in little steps.
Yeah, precisely. Nice job, by the way, on the employee thing. That's pretty cool.
Thanks. Did you enjoy this episode? Please go to your favorite podcast platform to subscribe, rate, and leave a review so others can discover it as well.
Growing self-awareness is a lifelong journey, and there's always further to go. And it's better when we're all in it together. Please think of someone you know who could benefit from hearing today's conversation and share this episode with them. We can't thank you enough for listening. Until next time, happy exploring, seekers.